General Hospital will reveal exciting news on Wednesday, May 14, 2025. First, Carly had begun to feel increasingly uneasy as she noticed distinct changes in Jocelyn's behavior over the past few weeks. Her daughter was no longer the open, expressive young woman she once knew, but instead had become guarded, calculated, and distant in ways that couldn't be brushed off as simple growing pains. Carly paid close attention to every detail: Jocelyn's frequent late-night absences, her insistence on privacy, the way she clung to her phone, and most notably, the emergence of a mysterious new friend named Vaughn, whose presence seemed to coincide with her daughter's abrupt transformation. Carly, a woman no stranger to secrets and deception, could sense when something was dangerously off, and this time, her mother's intuition refused to be ignored. Determined not to sit idly by, Carly turned to Jason, the one person she could trust without question when it came to investigating threats and protecting family. As she laid out everything she had observed, Jason listened with quiet concern and immediately recognized the red flags. They launched a discreet investigation into Jocelyn's activities, combing through phone data, surveillance footage from places she frequented, and tracking any online behavior that might offer clues. What emerged wasn't a harmless teen rebellion or a sketchy relationship, it was something far more alarming. Jocelyn was moving with the precision and discipline of someone embedded in a highly organized operation, and every trace pointed to one chilling conclusion: she was involved with an intelligence agency. Carly's heart raced with dread as the pieces came together. The idea that her daughter might be entangled in espionage was unthinkable, but the evidence was undeniable. One night, when Jocelyn returned home unusually late, Carly tried confronting her. She asked direct, pressing questions, but Jocelyn deflected with vague responses and tense silences. Jason, ever the tactician, urged Carly to hold back from pressing too hard. Instead, they doubled down on the investigation, delving deeper until they uncovered a secured audio file linked to Vaughn. The encrypted recording revealed the existence of a covert recruitment program targeting top-tier college students, operated under the guise of the WSB, a notorious global intelligence agency. What shattered Carly the most wasn't the existence of such a program, but the horrific realization that Jocelyn had already signed on. Official records retrieved from an internal WSB database confirmed it: Jocelyn Spencer had been formally inducted as a special trainee under a 6-month covert assignment, completely behind her family's back. Even more horrifying, Vaughn wasn't merely a friend or guide, he was her handler, responsible for overseeing her actions and reporting them to higher-ups. Carly's knees buckled as she read through the extracted document, Jocelyn's name marked in red with the status "recruited, active." It brought back painful memories of loved ones lost to the shadows of secret operations, and a new terror took hold as she realized her daughter was now part of that world. Jason, sensing the urgency, immediately began formulating contingency plans. They couldn't go to the authorities, not with WSB involved. Any overt interference could mark Jocelyn as compromised or even traitorous, putting her life at risk. Carly was gripped by the devastating truth. The false sense of safety she thought she'd built around her daughter had failed. Jocelyn hadn't been dragged into this, she had chosen it. And now she was in far deeper than Carly could have imagined. But the deeper they looked into Vaughn, the more suspicious he became. His file was incomplete, his background sanitized. Jason speculated that Vaughn might not even be a fully sanctioned WSB agent. There was a possibility he was running a side operation, using Jocelyn for a different agenda, perhaps as a pawn in a greater scheme neither she nor her family could comprehend. Now Carly faced a horrifying choice: accept that her daughter had willingly joined a perilous world of secrets, danger, and loyalty tests, or take matters into her own hands and extract her before it was too late, even if it meant breaking laws and risking everything. But with time slipping away and more questions arising than answers, one thing was certain: Jocelyn's fate was now entangled in forces much bigger than any of them. And Carly and Jason would have to race against those forces to protect her from a world that had no mercy for mistakes. Second, Drew had been relentlessly pursuing the vague and suspicious connections surrounding Portia and Brad. But it wasn't until Brad discreetly handed him a thick file along with an encrypted drive that all the doubts began to solidify into undeniable truth. The data Brad provided wasn't just recovered text messages from a discarded device, it also included audio recordings of secret conversations between Portia and a hidden figure whose voice was unmistakable, Nina. Drew had harbored suspicions for some time about a possible link between Portia and Nina, especially after several recent tense encounters. But now he held in his hands the proof that gave him full control over the situation. Without hesitation, he began using this information as leverage to pressure Portia. Knowing full well that she would do anything to keep her role in the dark scheme hidden. Cornered and with no viable escape, Portia's anger and resentment became obvious. She was furious that Drew not only confronted her with irrefutable evidence but also forced her into cooperation under the guise of protecting her career and family. Her resistance was weak and short-lived, and her evasive responses, darting eyes, and prolonged silences only confirmed for Drew that she was hiding something even more damning. What struck him hardest was the consistent involvement of Nina, someone he had long suspected but never had concrete proof against, now clearly implicated in an orchestrated takedown attempt aimed at him. With the documents in hand, Drew began connecting the dots. A carefully constructed plot designed to ruin his reputation by staging a night of apparent disgrace involving ketamine and sex workers, an event choreographed to not only destroy his public image but also weaken his position at Chancellor Winters and in any legal battles over control and influence. But unlike past attempts to damage him, this time, Drew had anticipated the betrayal. His calculated, measured nature had outpaced Nina's expectations, and now, the upper hand was his. Quietly coordinating with Brad, an expert at surviving in the shadows of power, Drew continued peeling back the layers of the conspiracy. He tracked financial transactions linked to Nina. Discovering payments sent to offshore accounts under aliases, which were later confirmed to be funds used to compensate those involved in the setup. Several participants had already fled the city. But Brad managed to track down one key witness, a woman who had acted as a middle agent in arranging both the drug distribution and the escort services, all under Nina's direct instruction. As Drew dug deeper into the investigation, he began to realize that Nina's motives were far more complex than simple revenge over his connection to Sonny or Carly. This was a calculated power struggle in which Nina was willing to sacrifice anyone to preserve her influence in finance, media, and even political circles. But she had made a fatal miscalculation, underestimating Drew's ability to retaliate with precision. While Portia had now become a pawn forced to compromise the very values she once upheld. Drew had become the one holding all the cards. He didn't rush to expose everything. Instead, he opted for a more strategic approach, slowly unraveling the plot while using Portia's growing fear to coerce her into feeding him information from Nina's inner circle, thereby expanding his reach into the higher echelons of those covertly supporting her. As Portia began to realize that silence was no longer her shield, she wavered and eventually showed signs that confirmed Nina's role as the mastermind behind the smear campaign. With every puzzle piece falling into place, Drew no longer had any doubts. Nina had launched a dirty war, and now, he would be the one to end it, using the very weapons she had forged against him. Third, Willow was devastated. What began as a lingering ache in her heart over Michael's cold absence during his recovery in Germany suddenly twisted into something far more painful when she stumbled upon the truth. Drew had trotted the entire deception. She hadn't been meant to find out. It was only by chance that she overheard a hushed conversation between two nurses. One of whom referenced the American executive who paid them well to keep the woman with the long hair away. Her heart pounded as she pieced together the timeline, remembering how, when she flew across the world hoping to see Michael, the nurses insisted he refused any visitors, especially her. She had left shattered, believing Michael no longer loved her, when in fact, he never even knew she had come. At first, Willow was paralyzed by disbelief. Drew had always been someone she trusted, a mentor, a family friend, someone she leaned on in moments of weakness. The thought that he would go to such lengths to keep her away from the man she loved felt inconceivable. She tried to reason with herself, to believe there must have been a justification. An emergency, anything. But the more she investigated, the clearer and more disturbing the truth became. She began digging quietly, retracing steps and calling contacts in the German hospital. All under the guise of updating records. She uncovered discrepancies in the logs, unauthorized payments, staff assignments shuffled at the last minute. And even messages deleted from Michael's communication portal. Everything led back to Drew. He hadn't simply made a mistake, he had deliberately intervened, manipulated people. Paid off medical personnel, and ensured Willow's visit was erased from existence. Her pain had been orchestrated, premeditated, and designed to keep her in the dark. But why? That question haunted Willow more than anything else. Why would Drew, of all people, go to such extremes? What did he gain by keeping her away from Michael during one of the most vulnerable moments of their lives? The answers didn't come easily, but as she pushed deeper into the web of silence, she discovered another layer. Drew had been working with someone else. A series of financial transactions linked his name to a shell company, one that had surfaced in prior investigations into insider dealings. This company had ties to a media conglomerate, and Nina. The same Nina who had once been her adversary. The same Nina whose conflicts with Carly had driven wedges through entire families. It began to appear as if Drew wasn't acting alone, and the conspiracy went deeper than she could have imagined. The realization that she had been used, her heartbreak weaponized as part of a scheme she didn't yet understand, left Willow shaken to her core. Every interaction with Drew now felt tainted. Every word of support he had offered in the weeks after Michael's hospitalization was steeped in betrayal. She replayed the moments when he assured her Michael needed time. That she shouldn't push or fly to see him uninvited. At the time, it had sounded like wisdom. Now, it was clear, it had been manipulation. Torn between grief and fury. Willow knew she couldn't confront him yet, not without solid proof that would expose not only his lies but the motive behind them. She began collecting documentation, screenshots, timestamps. Even voice memos from hospital staff willing to speak anonymously. But the deeper she went, the darker it became. There were signs that Drew had tampered not just with her relationship, but with others as well. The entire operation in Germany appeared to be part of a broader cover-up, one possibly linked to financial or personal motives that had nothing to do with Michael's well-being. And still, Michael remained unaware of what truly happened. Willow now carried the burden of a truth that could destroy the fragile sense of stability they had tried to rebuild. She wasn't sure what would hurt more, telling Michael that she had been there for him and was turned away by someone he trusted, or letting him continue living in a lie. Believing she had abandoned him when he needed her most. But one thing was certain, Drew had crossed a line. And Willow was no longer the passive, gentle woman everyone thought she was. She was a mother, a fighter, and someone who would tear down every lie to protect the truth, even if it meant turning against someone who once stood beside her. The betrayal had lit a fire in her. Now, Willow wasn't just searching for answers. She was preparing for war. Fourth, Laura completely lost her composure the moment she received confirmation that Sonny was seriously considering selling the docks to Sidwell. It wasn't just a business transaction, it was a betrayal of everything Port Charles had fought to protect. The docks were not merely an economic asset. They were a symbol of order in a city where chaos always lingered beneath the surface. And now, the idea of handing them over to a man like Sidwell, a known criminal with veiled ties to international trafficking, money laundering, and political corruption, was nothing short of catastrophic. Laura couldn't fathom how Sonny, someone who claimed to protect this town and its people, could even entertain such a reckless decision. Fueled by a mixture of disbelief and fury, Laura didn't wait for intermediaries or formalities. She went straight to Sonny. Storming into his office with the intensity of a woman who had carried the weight of Port Charles on her shoulders for too long. Every fiber of her being was pulsing with urgency. She had seen this pattern before, when powerful men made dangerous alliances behind closed doors, always justifying it with promises of control, stability, or necessity. But Laura knew better. She had watched men like Sidwell consume cities from the inside out, wrapping their corruption in corporate smiles and legal loopholes until nothing remained but a shadow of the community that once was. To Laura, this wasn't just about the docks. It was about the precedent it would set. Once Sidwell took control, he wouldn't stop there. He would expand, infect, and manipulate. The small businesses along the waterfront would fall under his influence, labor unions would become pawns. And law enforcement, already stretched thin, would be forced into an endless cycle of reaction instead of prevention. Port Charles, a town that had already endured decades of turmoil, would be on the verge of spiraling into an unrecognizable version of itself. What made the situation even more infuriating was the fact that Sonny knew exactly who Sidwell was. This wasn't ignorance, it was a calculated risk, one Sonny had no right to take on behalf of the people who trusted him. Laura had supported Sonny through storms others couldn't withstand. She had defended his role in keeping certain criminal elements in check, balancing power in a way that, while imperfect, had kept greater evils at bay. But this was different. Selling out the docks to a predator like Sidwell was not a compromise. It was surrender. And Laura wasn't going to stand for it. Her anger wasn't the kind that screamed. It was sharp, cold, controlled, a quiet fury honed over years of leadership and heartbreak. She spoke with the precision of a mayor who had seen the city rise from ashes too many times to watch it be thrown back into fire for the sake of convenience or profit. Her voice carried the weight of warning, not just to Sonny but to anyone who dared to underestimate her resolve. Because Laura had made her decision. If Sonny moved forward with the deal, she would oppose him, not privately, not with whispers in back rooms, but publicly, with the full force of her office. She would rally the city council, mobilize the press, and shine a light on every shadow Sidwell crawled out from. She would expose the deal for what it truly was, a betrayal wrapped in false promises. Laura wasn't just angry. She was ready for a fight. And if Sonny chose to align himself with Sidwell, then he would be choosing to stand on the opposite side of everything she had fought to protect. In that moment, the lines were drawn. Not just between right and wrong, but between who would shape the future of Port Charles, and who would destroy it. Finally, Alexis was reaching her breaking point as Ava's relentless demands for money continued to escalate in the aftermath of the accident caused by Christina. The guilt over what happened had already taken a toll on Alexis, but Ava wasn't interested in healing or resolution. Instead, she clung to the incident like a weapon, wielding it at every opportunity to exert control and manipulate Alexis into handing over more money. What began as subtle requests quickly evolved into veiled threats, talks of legal action, whispers about going to the press, and constant insinuations that she could reopen the entire case if Alexis failed to cooperate. Once a sharp, principled attorney, Alexis now found herself cornered, emotionally worn down by Ava's calculated pressure. But beneath the guilt and anxiety, a fire was beginning to reignite. Alexis knew she couldn't let Ava control the narrative any longer, not for Christina's sake, and certainly not for her own. After nights spent pacing, questioning every decision, she resolved to shift the balance of power. She began treating Ava not as a grieving mother, but as a legal adversary. Alexis went back to the beginning. She revisited every piece of documentation related to the accident, police reports, medical records, phone call logs, and even brought in a private expert to reevaluate the alleged extent of Ava's injuries. What she discovered was alarming. Ava had exaggerated key details, prolonged her recovery for financial gain, and in some cases, blatantly distorted the truth. The evidence painted a much different picture than the one Ava had been selling. Armed with this new information, Alexis began assembling her response. She discreetly reached out to old contacts in the press, journalists who owed her favors. Ones who knew how to handle a quiet leak. If Ava wanted to make this a public spectacle, Alexis would be ready to expose every layer of manipulation hidden beneath her polished facade. She would not be blackmailed. She would not be humiliated into silence. Then came the letter, formal, scathing, and laced with razor-sharp legal language. Alexis sent it directly to Ava's legal counsel, demanding that all further communication regarding financial compensation cease immediately. She made it clear that if Ava pursued any further extortion, Alexis would file a countersuit and take the matter to court, complete with evidence of fraudulent intent and public deception. This was not a suggestion. It was a line drawn in stone. The letter wasn't just a legal move, it was a reclamation of identity. Alexis was no longer the shaken mother begging for peace. She was a force, strategic, unrelenting, and unafraid to fight fire with fire. She had been down too many dark roads to let someone like Ava manipulate her with crocodile tears and empty threats. Though Alexis knew the war wasn't over, she also knew the rules had changed. Ava would no longer dictate the pace or the terms. If Ava wanted to play hardball, Alexis was ready. And if she underestimated just how far Alexis was willing to go to protect her daughter and reclaim her dignity, then Ava was in for a brutal awakening.